Good afternoon and welcome back to another ironic introduction to another video. Today, Kabam has released the official update for the champion rebalance of February 2020, including Anihilus, Human Torch, Ebony Maw, Cull, Obsidian, and Namor. As always, if you would like to read the forum post instead, there will be a link to the forum in the description below. And the way I'm approaching timestamps is I'm going to go champion by champion. I'll start by reading just the champion, so I'll have a timestamp for like when I start on a specific champion. And then I'm going to give my thoughts and my own analysis on that champion afterwards, and I'll have a timestamp for that. So there will be 5 champions, each with 2 timestamps accordingly. That said, let me dive into the actual post. So summoners, thank you all for your patience as we worked to collect the data that we wanted to present you regarding the balance changes for Anihilus, Human Torch, Ebony Maw, Cull, Obsidian, and Namor. Below you will find information on what changes you can expect for each of these champions, as well as comparison data for these champions' performance in various game modes, such as Act 6, Alliance Wars, Labyrinth of Legends, and Realm of Legends. Aside from Realm of Legends, these areas are the areas of the game which we use to measure champion performance as both attackers and defenders against other champions. We use the data collected from across the game, compare and contrast to other champions, and make data-informed decisions as to whether or not these champions are in a place where we feel they are balanced in relation to other champions and content in game, or whether they not need to be tweaked one way or the other. As a reminder, here is our original post on the intention of balance changes and why they were paused. Hopefully you are caught up to speed on that, but there will be that in this forum if you want to navigate to it. Timeline for release. These changes will be live in game with our 25.3 release, which is scheduled for release on February 5th. Helping you make educated rank-up decisions. With the release of these upcoming balance changes in 25.3, we want to make sure that we give players the opportunity to change their minds on rank-up decisions made for the 2 champions that had a tune down. We have come up with a plan to allow players to regain any resources that were used on Namor and Cull Obsidian, including Awakening Gems and Signature Stones. This is not something we've done before, and the process is not as simple as rank down tickets. For any summoner that feels that they would like to change their mind about Awakening or ranking up Cull Obsidian or Namor, you'll be able to sell these 2 champions during a special 2-week time frame, including 5-star and 6-star versions. We will then identify all users that sold these champions during that time and return the champions, any duplicates, any Awakening Gems, generic or class, Signature Stones, generic or class, catalysts, rank up gems, ISO, and gold used on these champions within the coming month. If you received a champion multiple times from Crystals/Arena, the champion will be returned, awakened, and with the appropriate number of signature levels. So this is the projected timeline. February 5th, the champion 25.3 releases. Changes are live, and you'll be able to try them out in game. From the 10th to the 24th, a 2-week window, you'll be able to sell Cull, Obsidian, or Namor during this window. February 24th, the selling window will close. Our team will disable the ability to sell these champions. March 9th, projected date to return any Namor Cull Obsidian that was sold, along with any duplicates received gold, ISO, rank up gems, awakening gems, and sig stones. So we'll have those about a month later. From the initial changes. Any Cull Obsidian/Namor sold before or after this period is no longer eligible for this resource refund. This means that you will be without your champion for a couple of weeks, so keep this in mind when you decide if this is something that you would like to do. We realize that this is not as straightforward as rank down tickets, but we do not currently have the functionality to return all used resources in that way, though it's something we would like to look into for the future. Please note this is not the de facto compensation for any and all changes to champions in the future. Any changes that necessitate compensation plans will be handled on a case-by-case basis, and bug fixes are not considered the same as an intentional change. All champion rank-up decisions you make are made with the knowledge that rebalance changes can occur down the road, and if compensation is given, it may differ. So the future of balance changes. At this time, we do not have a schedule for the cadence in which we will continue balance changes. We will continue to do balance changes, but may do them incrementally or in batches every 6 months or so, such as this one. The timing has not been decided. There are already quite a few champions that were released between the time when we started looking at these champions and now, and there will be many more released in the future. Based upon our early looks at our data, we are working towards identifying additional champions in need of balance changes. Our goal with our original cadence was to create a process with the least impact on our players, but that did not work. We're going back to the drawing board and want to be more inclusive and gradual. We will let you all know when we have more information on balance changes moving forward. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the process with us as well. So that said, I'll have a timestamp here for those of you who only care about my thoughts on the forum. So like my general impression is I'm really psyched about this. I think that this is a really proper step in the right direction, but understand that I've always been of the mindset that balance and rebalance in any kind of online game is an expectation. If you are playing an online game, I always stand on the side of you should expect changes. Changes will happen, things will be tweaked. It is an online game, and that is one of the benefits of online games, and there are pros and cons to that. We see both the buffs, we see the nerfs, we see the bug fixes, and the changes, and that's one of the benefits. In non-online games, if the game is bugged, it's just bugged. There's nothing you can do about it. But in an online game, we see those bugs get fixed, we see improvements in the game, and we see new content. And when you're playing it, you got to just take the pros with the bad. And so personally, I've always seen it as a necessity, and I always have been cautious with everything, regardless of whether or not something is OP or underpowered. I always am willing to take a second look and evaluate, how robust I think a champion is. And, it's not something I really talk about, but it's something you should think about when you're ranking up a champion, because damage is not robust. That is something that can very easily be nerfed. Things like heavy cornering or potential bugs like Nick Fury dropping double suicides for double heals at the start of fights. Those are things that aren't robust and could be seen as like potentially bugs or things that need to be fixed in the game. But things like Namor's awakened ability, I don't think that was ever in danger of being changed, and it wasn't, because that's a very robust mechanic to the game. So you just kind of have to evaluate it from there, and it's tricky and it's a lot to navigate, but that's just like my initial input there. From then on, I think that I really would like to see, and I'm very happy to see, like some of the statistics and numbers for why Kabam will do this. So I haven't like fully evaluated that. You'll get my relatively first impression on some of those, but I think that's really necessary in having like this transparent conversation with your players. And then finally, I think that the way they're approaching the resource return is actually really great. I think that there are going to be a lot of people who take advantage of this because maybe they'll have regret, and absolutely power to you. There's a lot of people who, or maybe have like made that decision, and just the anxiety about this makes them just sick of that champion and they don't even want to bother. That's there as well. And there's also going to be plenty of people who have ranked up these champions and are like, no, I'm going to keep them at rank 5 max sigged because I like them regardless of these changes, myself included. And I just think that overall, this is probably like the ideal way or expectation I could have from Kabam. There are definitely things that could be done better, but I think that taking it from both a player and a developer standpoint, there's only so much that can be done both time and effort wise, and I think that at least currently, I think this is a reasonable approach to the balances. Personally, I never got overly frustrated with the word rebalance or nerf or buff. So personally, I know that I'm standing from like a different standpoint. A lot of this really affects a lot of other people differently, mostly people who spend a lot of money. But my argument is then again, if you're spending a lot of money and then the game gets rebalanced and that drives you up a wall, it gives you a lot of anxiety, it almost ruins the game for you, you might need to consider finding a new game, one more robust. Find a nice solid single player game or multiplayer games where the rebalance and the updates are more transparent. Kabam is working towards that as they discover that their game is way more online and active and a stronger community than they thought or may have thought previously. But just understand that going forward, this is going to be a natural thing. Champions get rebalanced, and you should expect that. I was a little ranty, but I just I want to throw my opinion out there because never once was I ever bothered by any of these potential rebalances or nerfs. I never even stressed it. I brought Namor up without a second thought, even knowing he was potentially going to get nerfed. I did it anyways, and just kind of like as evidence of how unaffected I personally am by rebalances, and that mentality. It's all about knowing what you're doing your rank ups for, and respecting the need for an online change. So rant aside, I'm going to jump straight into Anihilus here. So another timestamp for those of you paying attention. So Anihilus rebalance information. Summary. When we first looked at Anihilus, we found that he's performing quite well as a defender, but was underperforming as an attacker. While Anihilus has some strong utility as an attacker, we found that his damage potential was suffering due to tight timing windows. From left to right, the blue column indicates total encounters times undefeated. Defender remained at the end of the war win rate. He appeared at the end of the war quite a few times as a villain, 93%, but reasonably so at like 77, 75% in all the other categories. As far as tactics go, these are the defensive win rates across all nodes in Alliance War on the expert tier. When creating a champion who's intended to be a strong defender, these win rates are somewhere around where we would like them to be. The 93% in villain is quite high, however, it requires a certain defense tactic, and his overall encounters are low compared to other potent defenders in the game. As players gain more experience fighting Anihilus over time, these win rates will go down. Alliance War attack. This graph shows Anihilus' win rates when used in Alliance War attack. We've compared him to an assortment of champions. Anihilus' win rate is amongst the lowest at 30%. So I think this just means how many fights he wins in war. And yeah, 30% is pretty low. Using the same graph of the same champions, we compared their DPS. Anihilus is among the lowest at 941. We see champions such as Corvus Glaive hitting all the way up at 2400. That's to be expected. But Anihilus is down at like 911, and there's several other champions who match there with him, such as, let's see, we got Gila, Doctor Strange, Drax, Crossbones, Colossus, Carnage, Beast, and Angela. So he definitely needs some damage tuning. Their intention was to increase his attacker potency without affecting his win rate on defense, give Anihilus more time to capitalize on his furies he creates from his special 2. A single special attack from the opponent would waste almost half of the duration. Anihilus' playstyle is very aggressive and would often leave his opponents with lots of power. Increase the duration. So the actual changes was to increase the duration of the fury he converts from his special 2 from 12 to 18 seconds and add a timer icon to display how long the special 1 pauses stifles on the opponent. So, yeah, we'll talk about the changes in a minute. These stats, as far as I'm concerned, you got to keep in mind that these defender win rates, this is going to be a lot of Anihilus War bosses. So you might think, oh, damn, 77% is a lot as far as like having a defender remaining. But those are going to be mini bosses and bosses because Anihilus is one of the stronger tier defenders. So with that expectation in mind, you can understand why 77% is actually like a relatively reasonable number for a defender to be left at the end of war. 93% I do also agree is very high, but it really just comes down to tactics. And again, as people learn Anihilus, because he's like definitely one of the more frustrating fights and tricky to get a hold of, people will definitely see a better win rate. I do agree with that. I think this DPS stat chart is actually like fairly reasonable because they're comparing him to like a good range, and like when you're comparing him with Angela, Beast, like their damage output isn't too bad, but when we're talking about buffing someone's damage, we definitely want to see them have a higher damage per second than that. But again, Anihilus is already a strong defender, so it's his need to do more damage isn't too high because again, most of the times people are just using him for defense. So if we're talking specifically about the actual changes, this 12 to 18 second change, we actually have to talk a little bit about Anihilus. So to talk about Anihilus, what you need to know is that every time he strikes the opponent, it has a 60% chance to be an obliterating strike. Every time he obliterates strikes, it applies an armor break. Every time he applies an armor break, he applies a stifle. And then as a result, you can essentially do a 5-hit combo and then a special 2, convert all those stifles into furies. So now the question comes down to, if the stifles only last for 4 seconds, what are the chances, or what quantity of stifles could you theoretically apply to the opponent and then convert into a special 2? So for that, we go straight to the chart. So this is a probability chart. It's a probability distribution. I'll try to explain it the best I can, but you're either going to have to be good at statistics to double check my math, or you're just going to have to blind trust me. But I am Asian, so I would hope that you blind trust my math skills, but never blind trust anyone's math skills, because that is how you get conned. So overall, the way I do this statistically is this is the chance of getting 0 obliterating strikes out of 5, 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. And the way that is for like 0 out of 5, you take the percentage chance of getting not getting obliterating strike, and you multiply that by itself 5 times. So 0.4 times 0.4 times 0.4 gives you a 1% chance that you will not get a single obliterating strike. And the reason this is just one single probability here is because if we're talking 0 out of 5, you can choose 0 numbers out of 5 exactly 1 time. because once you've done, you're selecting all 5. And on the same vein, it's the same over here. But for 1 out of 5, this is if I were to take 0.6, or the chance of getting a single obliterating strike, and then you multiply it by 0.4 an additional 4 times for all the chances that it would fail. And the reason I have 5 here is because you could get that obliterating strike on the first hit, or the second hit, or the third hit, or the fourth hit, or the fifth hit, and in that way there's 5 instances. And then here 2 out of 5, same concept, except there's 10 instances when you choose 2, like the first and the second, the first and the third, the first and the fourth, the first and the fifth, the second and the third, the second and the fourth, the second and the fifth, etc. Same for the third. 3 out of 5 is the same concept. And then so down here I have the sum of all the probabilities. So again, you're looking at about a 1% chance to get 0 obliterating strikes, a 7 or about 8% chance to get 1. You're looking at a 23% chance to get 2, a 34 or 35-ish% chance to get 3, a 26% chance to get 4, and a solid 7 or 8-ish% chance to get 5. And so in the real world, what does that mean? In the real world, that means you're looking at about a 2 to 4 theory charge. So anywhere from 2 to 4 theories upon activating a special 2, assuming you're not consuming the stifles in the process. And what this means is we actually have to look at the quantity of damage that you get. So it's 656.7 divided by his attack. So when you take this number, it's actually a 30% theory. So this theory is 30%. So anywhere from a 60% increase in damage to a 120% increase in damage after a special 2 for 18 seconds now. So as far as damage increases, that's really relevant. So this is essentially a 50% increase to that. So if it was 60% to 120%, you're now looking at the normalized value of like Fury potency. It's equivalent to like 90% to 180% increase in Fury potency. And Anihilus, he wasn't hitting too weak, but he also wasn't hitting super hard. All this essentially does is give you a longer window and overall roughly a 30% increase in damage during that window, and that window was already fairly short. So I don't see Anihilus becoming the largest of attackers, and again, the math here is really complicated, so I'm sorry if I don't explain it proper. It's definitely really tough to do, and that's going to come up later. But I definitely don't see this change alone being enough to really like make Anihilus a solid attacker. I think what it really means is if you rank him up for defense and you're using him for a very specific purpose, and that specific purpose, my friends, is guaranteed armor break. If you're using him for solid armor break chances, then Anihilus is going to do okay. And the thing to remember is that he also has some solid immunities. He is immune to Incinerate, Frostbite, Cold Snap, and any effect that locks or lowers or locks power, which is actually really good. Because not too many champs are Incinerate immune, so you have to remember when you're using Anihilus, it's probably as a counter either in the armor break or the Incinerate immune. And when you consider those 2 factors, he definitely takes a step up because you're really only using him for a handful of fights. But again, I don't see this buff being enough to really take him from like a defender only slot and bring him into the attacker role, but we might see him for a few fights here or there, and it'll definitely feel better to use. But again, the major thing is that it's really tough to raise any of his damage output without like making him absurdly OP on defense. Like, he's already a solid defender, incredibly punishing when he hits you, and so like this, for the most part, people are already baiting special 1s out of him, so they're not feeling like the special 2 is gonna like affect the defense. And if they affect like the special 1, or they give him just raw damage output or increase the Furies, his damage from the Furies in general, that's gonna make him an even stronger defender than he already is, and he already has kind of a fairly high win rate as defense. So I think as far as Anihilus buffs go, I'd like to sit on this one and stand by, definitely not going to be a great attacker. Maybe bump him up a little bit overall. I mean, definitely bump him up a little bit overall, but you were already only using him for the Incinerate immunity or the armor break. And if you were using him for those 2 reasons, now it just feels slightly better. And maybe for the most part, I think a big part of it is intelligence, or knowledge, not intelligence, but knowledge and awareness. And so now knowing that, hey, I'm supposed to like wait until I get multiple stifles on the opponent and throw a special 2 2 to get the Furies to get like an extended short burst damage window. People might be playing Anihilus more just to see how that damage window looks out, and they might say, oh, this actually isn't that bad, which it's not great, but it's not that bad. So next up, I want to touch on Human Torch. So we'll take a timestamp here for those. So after looking at Human Torch's data, it was pretty evident that he's very strong in specific matchups, mainly against Mystics or when using his pre-fight ability, but was underperforming in other matchups. His original goal was to be great in certain matchups, but also to be a decent attacker in other matchups as well. For his balance change, we decided to increase the rate at which he gains temperature, allowing him to easily access his higher levels of damage without making him better in matches where he already shines. Conclusions. The data shows a correlation between his average temperature during a fight and his fight performance. We also did a specific investigation into DPS versus temperature. High temperature has damage above the baseline and low temperature is below it. In fights where he's able to maintain high temperature consistently above 10, often above 17, and or a number of incinerates and smolders, his damage is about 15% higher than the baseline. In fights where he cannot maintain temperature consistently below 10, his damage is 15 to 40% lower than the baseline, depending on just how low his temperature is. In examining DPS across all his matchups, good, average, and bad, Human Torch spends more time at low temperature levels, so his damage across all fights and matchups is below baseline. Important to note here that our baseline in this case is Ronin. We identified him as a champion who we do not want to change and believe is in a very good place. Balance-wise, I do agree. Objective of changes, would like to improve his performance in his less than ideal matches without making him even better in the fights he's already good at. Still wants him to exist on either side of the damage baseline depending on the player's ability to skillfully play as Human Torch and pick the correct matchups. We want to narrow the gap between his best and worst fights. So the following charts are a comparison of his DPS divided across different categories of temperature. For example, L 40% plus M 40% plus high 20% means the player spent more than 40% of their time at low temperature, less than 40% at medium, and less than 20% at high. From left to right, the temperature ranges represented are frequently low temp, infrequently at medium, and infrequently at high, frequently low, infrequently medium, frequently at high, frequently low, infrequently medium, infrequently high, frequently low, frequently medium, frequently high. This is going to be easier if I just skip straight to the chart. This chart doesn't include fights against Mystic Champions or fights where his pre-fight his ability is active. Against Mystic Champions, his DPS improves significantly depending on the temperature, and while pre-fight ability is active, you know, again, they're mostly just trying to affect his ability outside. So we see... Ooh, this is so tough. Damage output in general is just low when he's at low temperature. That's the substantial, and the more frequently he's able to maintain high damage, we see increases from like 400 to 600 damage per second. That's in the high range. So the chart below illustrates where Human Torch resides on the DPS percentile scale. This is more accurate. He is indicated by the highlighted square. This chart is represented by our of our most skilled players. I don't know what that means at Kabam. So we have Act 5, he's sitting relatively middling. Act 6, he's sitting relatively towards the higher end. AA, Expert, so I believe that is Alliance versus Alliance. He's towards the middle of the median, a little bit higher. For Map 6 Alliance Quest, he's on the higher end. Map 7, he's back to hitting actually sub average. On the Realm of Legends, he's sub higher. And uncollected one-shots, he's relatively average. So keeping up, but definitely probably a little lower than what they wanted. Please note, Cull Obsidian has been removed from the Realm of Legends DPS as he compresses the rest of the champions significantly. It's also important to note that this is representative of his overall use. Since Human Torch tends to be used in more matchups where he would be very good, his DPS on this chart is higher than it would be in less opportune matches. Changes. The rate at which temperature increases while charging heavy is increased by 25%. This may seem like a small change, but he can now go from 0 to 20 temp in approximately 2 seconds, which means he can hit max temperature from both a parry and from his special too. Additionally, because temperature doesn't fall off for a few seconds when it reaches 20, being able to easily reach max temperature has a compounding effect on how much time he spends at high temperature overall. Timestamp here for those of you who care about my thoughts. First off, I want to apologize. Man, these stats are something nuts on Human Torch. This is some high-level analysis. Like, you got to be really aware and good at reading charts to, like, follow this. Even me, I'm taking, like, a quick breather to just, like, even understand what I'm looking at. Part of that is because this chart is shit. Like, if I'm being completely honest, this is not how I would graph his data. It's just really unnecessary. There's a lot of acronyms. It's just not necessary, and they're not common community acronyms. I don't know if these are common acronyms in other communities, but they're definitely not mine, which makes this a lot harder to handle, and I wouldn't use these percentages. Effectively, what I would have done if I was Kabam and you're trying to analyze this champion, what I would have done is I would have analyzed his damage at low temperature, analyzed his damage at mid temperature, and analyzed his damage at high temperature, and then just do a simple normalization times the percentage of times people are in all of those, and then you can calculate, oh, this is his damage when people are spending most of their time at low, damage when he's spending most of their time at mid, damage when they're spending most of their time on high, based on the percentage of time they are spending in each of those categories, and then you get an average overall temperature instead of this ugly ass chart. Sorry for the criticism and sorry for the swearing, but man, when I see bad charts, it just drives me nuts. As a science-minded person, just, sorry, off topic. Anyways, changes themselves look amazing. Human Torch was already like an amazing counter to a lot of different champions, and now I feel like he's definitely going to shore up on his weaknesses. He's not gonna be the like world's most amazing non-mystic, non-pre-fight ability champion, and I really would have liked to see his pre-fight ability, his awakened ability, like that percentage tuned up a little bit, but I can understand that they didn't. They wanted it to be more of a one-off thing. But overall, if you're bringing Human Torch to fights, they're definitely gonna end a lot faster. So as long as the opponent is not incinerate immune, you can feel good about Human Torch. I would even argue now, if you're not using him as a counter, he's definitely solidly worth rank 4. Without question, he's going to be one of the best options for heal reversal. He's going to be one of the best options for like solid incinerate damage over time, for like anti-safeguard and the like. And again, maybe even rage, because he doesn't have like the highest crit damages. A lot of his damage comes from damage over time, and a lot of that comes from max temp. So yeah, I think overall these changes are going to really, really shore him up. The problem is that it's a little more complicated than just like saying these changes are going to shore him up. This is something that I feel we won't really notice the effects of until people are playtesting it. Human Torch is already mostly used for counter purposes, so we're already like comfortable seeing him at max damage, and it's going to be tough to like fully understand how much of an increase in uptime this is, because of the whole like once you reach max temp, the temperature stays. So like the fact that you're hitting max temp a lot faster means that the uptime here might be like a 50% increase, but it could also be as crazy as like a 200% increase in overall uptime for max temperature / high temperature. And it's really something I would like to see that number on, those statistics on, before I kind of made any kind of evaluation. But overall, I'm really, really pumped about this Human Torch change. Personally, I didn't think he needed any kind of a change. He was already very strong as a counter, and that was good enough of a reason to rank him up as is. But that said, now we have another complicated champion, Ebony Maw. So Ebony Maw was designed to be a defensive champion, built to excel in Alliance War defense and specifically counter some of the most dominant attacking champions in this mode. On offense, Ebony Maw was supposed to focus on needing to ramp up over multiple fights to be more useful. We will be making a number of changes to give him more use in attack and make him a more fearsome defender that forces opponents to respect the rules of fighting Ebony Maw. Ebony Maw uses a building resource called persuasion to trigger falter, which causes the opponent to miss their attacks if they don't play around the persuasion mechanic. However, even with this mechanic in play, most players disregard his mechanics and power their way through Ebony Maw encounters. Below is a graph showing his overall performance on Alliance War defense across all defense tactics. So we're seeing 40% and sub 40%. When it was only rank 5s, only that number gets up to like 55, 56. But again, considering he was defense-minded, not very high. Ebony Maw on offense seems extremely low uses in every attack or foe scenario, aside from a few very specific matchups. Even though he's built as a defensive champion, no champion should fall below our baseline and be practically useless. To put this into perspective, Ebony Maw's damage is so low that he's currently outdamaged by many 3-star champions. Below you will see his numbers in comparison to other champions that we believe are also eventually in need of an update to their ability to deal damage. These include Abomination, Agent Venom, Cyclops, Daredevil, Karnak, Hulkbuster, Howard the Duck, Groot, Dormammu, and Drax. And so highest average DPS across all modes with this is here. And where is Ebony Maw? Didn't help me here, but these are some pretty low numbers. You're gonna have to check this one out. This chart is not exactly visual friendly, so I can't really detail that too much. Ebony Maw's performance on both attack and defense do not fulfill the minimum baseline requirements for a well-balanced champion, and ranks worse in many ways in comparison to champions on the roadmap to be buffed. Maw needs to be brought up to fit in line with our baseline changes. So persistent charges, change persistent charge PV mechanic to stack up to 20 from 6. PV charges gained from completing all missions increased to 5 from 1. Ramping value, persuasion timer reduced to 0.5 from 0.7. Potency of Black Tongue up to 40% from 30%. Deterioration passive timer decreased to 2 seconds from 6. Degeneration effect changed to modify attack based. Degeneration effect changed to modified attack from base attack. Degen damage increased to 0.3 attack from 0.2. Sig ability changed to a percentage increase rather than a flat amount to increase overall damage potential. These changes are not intended to push Ebony Maw to the top of our DPS charts, but rather give him some offensive usage and increase his damage to a baseline level. This will also enhance his defensive viability and hopefully encourage players to respect the Maw on defense, since his falter mechanic will come into play much more frequently if they don't follow his rules. Additionally, with the boosted damage, Ebony Maw will be much more dangerous on attack-enhancing nodes across all modes. These changes will allow Ebony Maw to ramp up the request much quicker and have him deal a lot more damage in the fights he is suited for. Additionally, we expect to see his win rates rise to a respectable level in Alliance War defense and other modes where players encounter him. Timestamp here for those of you who only care about my thoughts, and so I apologize here. I don't have a handy dandy Excel sheet. There's so much going on here, so all I have here are my notes, which, you know, I'll also have my notes maybe in a comment or something, because I don't like have a way to zoom in here. But essentially, I think it's important before I talk on anything else, is that essentially it's a theoretical 20 stacks of deterioration at the start of every fight. In order to understand that, you really need to see the way he gains persistent charges. So he gains a persistent charge every time he nullifies a buff from the opponent, causes the opponent to lose power, causes the opponent to falter and miss. You can get missions 2 and 3. You can get missions 2 and 3 every single fight completely easily, which means that, like, consistently speaking, you could get 20 stacks in 2 fights. So like, this increases your first degeneration by 1.4816 multiplier all the way up to 9.2. It's just that previously, like, his damage was super low, so you didn't really feel it. Additionally, the time to hit each phase, this persuasion timer, falter phase, is reduced from 14 seconds to 10 seconds. So falter occurs at 20 persuasion charges. The persuasion charges, they start ticking up after 5 seconds. So now after 5 seconds plus 10, or effectively 15 seconds for the first phase, and then every 10 seconds afterwards, you'll be hitting a falter phase. So as an attacker, this feels really good. As a defender, it's a noticeable increase, but not too bad, since you should be heavying Ebony Maw anyways to break his focus. Black Tongue, this potency refers to the power gain that people break. So once you've hit 100 persuasion charges, the opponent receives 40% power gain reduction just across the board, everything, 40% power gain reduction instead of 30. Not too much of a noticeable change, but it definitely provides him some utility, if you're in those longer fights. Not that they happen too often. And then another noticeable note here on the persuasion timer change is that now, instead of taking you 75 seconds to hit max persuasion charges, it only takes you 55 seconds. So that means you have 1 minute of just like playing perfect and never getting hit before you hit Black Tongue, and you actually feel the effect of this. Not like super useful in war, since like most war fights you don't really want to go to this long, and you're probably not using Ebony Maw to take down a boss, since he doesn't have the damage output and will time out regardless. But yeah, in some longer fights this might come up and definitely help shore him up. Deterioration passive timer decreased to 2 seconds from 6. This is actually really good, because the deterioration timer on the Black Tongue, essentially once you've hit that, you're getting a deterioration passive every 2 seconds instead of 6, which means that once you've passed that 55-second initial ramp up time every fight, your duration of time to get additional damage from your degen increases. And so it used to take you 120 seconds to get the full max value degen damage, and now it only takes 40. Still kind of long, but that's a noticeable cut. Additionally, the Degen damage potency, for give you an idea, for a rank 5 5-star, it used to be 4,025 damage and is now 6,037, and that is assuming you are sitting on like the max number of deterioration. So, if you have that max stack, like once he's perfectly ramped up, your first one's going to hit for 6,000 instead of 4,000. So it's a 50% increase in potency. Again, considering like the effort it takes to get to that many deteriorations, it's not like the world's largest number of damage there, so you're still not feeling super great. And then change to a percentage increase rather than a flat amount. I would need to see these actual numbers before I commented, but this will be overall relatively minor, I personally believe. So my overall thoughts on Ebony Maw is I still don't think he's going to be a good attacker. This is definitely going to help him out on a defense. Like he's already kind of a cheeky defender just because of his like anti-crit. You're forcing people to take alternative options besides like Corvus Glaive and Ghost, which are two very common Alliance War champions. But overall, I don't think this is going to make him like brutal. And I don't think it's going to raise that number too much. But we'll have to see. It's all about overall player impression, but I think that this damage is still going to be too weak. I think that even with these changes and these increases, and like it still takes way too long to ramp up, and even once you're ramped up, you're not getting the proper payoffs. In my opinion, the only way to make his damage fair and like consistently valuable is that the deterioration passives, these ones that you start every fight with, weren't removed. Every time you apply a degen, they're removed. So you have to re-ramp them every single time. And like even now, once he's proper ramped with persistent charges, you're only getting 6,000 damage from one degen. And I know you're like, only 6,000. Well, 6,000 damage from a champion who does barely any damage on his basic attacks as a rank 5 5-star. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect every degen to be hitting for 6,000 damage once you've ramped him up. Because even then, it's not like the world's largest amount of damage for a guy with like relatively modest utility at best, considering he's like super squishy in a hardcore glass cannon. So maybe in the future, I'd really like to see those deterioration passives like be a permanent stick, and then like reduce this again back from 5 charges per mission back down to 1, keep the max at 20, and then let people ramp up very slowly instead to feel that value. So those are my thoughts on Ebony Maw. Now we get to the good stuff, probably the stuff people care about with Cull Obsidian. So after looking at our data across all game modes, we have determined that Cull Obsidian is out-damaging every other high-damage champion in the game. While he does have his limiting factors, once he's fully ramped up, he's able to end fights before even high-level opponents can do any meaningful damage to him. The goal of Cull's rebalance is to make tuning changes that keeps Cull Obsidian as one of the top damage dealers in game, but with a more reasonable margin. While Cull has no persistent charges, his damage is average, and he does take slightly above average damage due to having to block/parry for longer, though even in these early fights, the damage he's taking isn't that much higher than other champions. It only takes a few persistent charges for Culls to get rolling. It's really only his first fight that he's below average, so he doesn't really care about most of his ramp. Once Cull is fully ramped, his damage becomes massive, and fights end so fast he only needs to parry a few times before they're over, so he takes basically no damage and is able to brute force through pretty much any matchup. He also has a reasonably high skill impact, but really without actually adding much difficulty once an ideal/efficient rotation is identified. Cull's damage comes from stacking multipliers, but his armor breaks seem to be the most important multiplier. When we look at where his damage is coming from, we see that the further ramped up he is, the greater the percent of his damage comes from route. This is likely due to it becoming easier to time his route to benefit from multiple armor breaks and his large attack bonuses from Thanos' favor buffs. Objectives of changes: reduce his fully ramped DPS, but maintain Cull as a, if not the top damage in combat/fights where he excels, but force a ramped Cull to respect matches he's not appropriate for. Do not increase his block proficiency, but increase DPS at 0 persistent charges so he ends early fights faster. Introduce a feeling of burst and lull to Cull's DPS output. So this first one, it compares Cull, Ronin, Venom left to right in fights against Winter Soldier in the realm of Legends. The orange triangle represents their DPS, and the blue represents their damage done versus damage received. So the higher is better. This damage is represented with the first. So first up we have here on the left is Cull Obsidian. So we're looking at orange triangle represents their DPS, so he's low on the first fight, and fell relatively middling as far as damage received. This chart's already garbage because why are you taking damage with Ronin Yeah, this chart is irrelevant. You shouldn't be taking damage with Ronin or Venom. Maybe Venom versus Winter Soldier, but definitely not Ronin against Winter Soldier, since you could just literally intercept only. And Cull Obsidian is a mandatory parry-heavy playstyle to get his damage output. Venom, arguably so, but you could also do Venom the same way. So that chart is garbage. This chart features the same champions in a fight against Hulk in the Realm of Legends, representing a later fight in a quest with higher or full ramp-up. Note that Ronin has a class advantage in this matchup. So here they say Cull Obsidian matches. Ronin is, let's see, orange is what, damage? Orange is damage, so Ronin is taking less damage, but having a higher return rate, and Venom is having, yeah, again, this chart means nothing. All that's important here is that Cull Obsidian is taking and dealing as much damage as far as per second, but he's dealing insane amounts of damage per second. This final, skipping all these charts, these are all useless. This last one, this chart shows a comparison of Cull's DPS versus other high damage dealing through Act 6. This is also separated by player skill. Again, this is a useless chart. Sorry for skipping all the charts, team, but they're useless. So have as the actual changes, mod 1400 to 1130.77. Duration for the heavy armor break is 10 seconds, increased to 14. The chance to apply is changed from 50% to 75%. That's an increase. So Thanos' favorite bonuses changed from 15% to 5% duration and ability accuracy per charge. His signature ability, the Fury, is decreased from 5 seconds to 4 seconds for the Fury, and the potency is increased from 45.49 to 40.57. I'm assuming that's for a rank 5 star. These changes should somewhat shorten the DPS gap between him and everyone else once he's fully ramped up, while still allowing him to remain a top attacker and even increase his DPS in early fights before he has built up charges. So in order to really understand what happened here, we kind of have to address some things. So first, I realized that I've done something wrong here. So this is supposed to be 2100 times 0.7 or times 10 divided by 14. This is supposed to be times 14 divided by 10. Okay, so here's where it's important. In order to really understand the Cull Obsidian changes, you have to understand first that a lot of his damage comes from his ability to armor break. And before, it was a 50% chance to armor break, seen here, with a high armor break modifier, 1400. But they've decreased the modifier, increased the duration that the armor breaks are applied for, as well as increase the percentage chance of it proccing. And you might be asking yourself, well, why does this matter? And it's because at the high end, after you're ramped up, you don't have to worry about this low percentage chance to proc. It's only in the first fight that you're really rocking off this base percentage to proc armor break with Cull Obsidian. So that first fight feels really slow because you might not be getting armor breaks. And if you're not getting armor breaks, you're not feeling the damage gain, and it makes the fight feel really slow as a result. So again, we have a probability tree here. So before the 50%, when it was 50%, you had a 12.5% chance to get 0 armor breaks, a 37.5% chance to get 1 armor break, 37.5% chance to get 2, and 12.5% chance to get 3, which meant about, on average, you were looking at about 1.5 armor breaks, on a fight, which meant on the effective time active, you were looking at 2,100 armor break, which normalized to the 10-second scale is 1,500 or 2,100 armor break for the 10 seconds. That normalized matters more over here. Because over here, with a 75% chance, you have a... my head hurts, man. Sorry. On a 75% chance to trigger the armor break, you're only looking at a 1.5% chance to get 0 armor break, so you're getting relatively screwed if you don't. A 14% chance to get 1 armor break, 42% chance to get 2, and a 42% chance to get 3, which means most of the times you're living in around the 2 to 3. I called the average armor break 2.5, but it's actually technically less. I was just too lazy to do the actual math, so if you want to correct my math in the comments, feel free. Like the way this actually works out, I already can't stand the trolls. The way this actually works out is it's 0.0 you know, I can't do it right now. I'll do it another time. I'll fix it. But yeah, just know that this isn't actually 2.5. It's probably closer to like 2.2. But normalizing that times the new potency, you're looking at an actual increase in armor break, 2826, multiplied by the effective time here, which is 14/10. We're looking at a 1.5 increase in duration. Normalized per second, you're looking at 3,957 armor break potency. So the armor break potency actually scaled up, which is really relevant because these numbers only affect the first fight. Because after the first fight, like his armor break chance, it skyrockets. So like before, you know, the first fight was slow, but the second fight, third fight, fourth fight, you know, you're almost getting the armor break every single hit. So it didn't matter that it was a 50% chance. But now on the first fight, you're getting much more armor break very quickly. So you could probably stand to do a different rotation on the first fight, like a parry heavy into like some regular intercepting and combos, so you can mitigate the damage you're taking on that first fight. These numbers are wrong. Sorry for that. And so that's how it increases his damage in the early game. If you're like wondering like, hey, they, you know, lowered this mod, how is his damage higher if like they've lowered the armor break modifier, they've lowered the duration of the fury, and they've lowered the modifier from the fury? How is his first fight easier? And it's because on the first fight, 75% chance, this 25% chance increased armor break means you're dealing a lot of damage for a lot longer. So yeah, that's the overall changes to Cull Obsidian. I apologize, I'm not like the most avid Cull Obsidian advocate, because now I just need to like rant a little bit. I don't think Cull Obsidian is a good champion. I think that a lot of people maybe overhype him. I think that if you're using him as a taxi, let me be clear, if you're using him as a taxi, he's a solid champion. He can just absolutely obliterate so many fights. But as we push higher and higher content, it becomes more and more important for your champion to be able to sustain block damage, or at least have an intercept playstyle. The thing is that other champions who are glass cannons like Ghost or Corvus Glaive, they have a form of sustain, or other champions who are really squishy, they can do like intercepting. Like Stealth Suit Spider-Man is a great example of a champion with really, really squishy mechanics. But his entire playstyle is built around intercepting. You never actually need to parry with Stealth Suit Spider-Man. Cull Obsidian's entire damage rotation is built around parry heavy, hammer into the opponent with sick armor breaks applied, and just take huge advantage of all those multiplicative factors to get huge burst windows out of him. And the fact is that parry heavy playstyle, you know, when you need to ramp him up, it's going to feel bad. Because you might say, oh, well, Domino's a parry heavy playstyle, but she actually has a reasonable block proficiency, and hers is a damage over time, and it's stable. You get the same amount of value out of that every single fight regardless, with no ramp up. So in my opinion, these changes, they take Cull Obsidian, they make him a little bit more well-rounded, which definitely, in my eyes, actually makes him a better champion. But even with this, I still think he's not a good champion. I think that if you have a 5-star Cull Obsidian, feel comfortable rank 4ing him, because he's an amazing taxi. He's going to clear so many quests so fast for you, and as long as he's relevant in lower health pool fights and you're willing to dump potions into him, he's going to be amazing. But as we push higher and higher late game stage content, Cull Obsidian is going to feel worse and worse. You're going to take block hits, and you have to take block hits to maintain that damage, and it's going to feel worse and worse. You're going to be like, I'm just dying to blocks. I only took 20 blocks and I was dead. Yeah, that's the motion the game is pushing in, and that's my standpoint. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be disagree with me, so feel free to like argue it. You know, if you disagree, and you're like, hey, Jay, you're really undervaluing this champion, let me know. But personally, I only see him as an up to maybe 6.1-ish, 6.2 taxi, and only a taxi in Alliance Quest if you're willing to dump a few potions into him. But the ideal in Alliance Quest is to not have to use any resources at all. Cull Obsidian just, you know, there are better champions. There are champions who have the same value as a taxi high damage burst window without the negatives of block damage. So that's my personal take. I think that if you have a ranked up Cull Obsidian, an awakened Cull Obsidian, I think take advantage of the sell. That's my stance. I'm personally going to sell my 4-star Cull Obsidian because I brought him up to like rank 4 or rank 3, I forget, and I awakened and sigged him up to sig 60, and I want those resources back because honestly, I played with him for like 5 hours and I still don't think he's good. So yeah, that's my standpoint. Feel free to disagree. I would love to hear the reasons because, hey, maybe I'm undervaluing him. Maybe I'm not playing him right. Feel free to share. But, you know, that's my stance on Cull Obsidian, and that's where we're at moving into Namor. Albeit the unpopular decision. So Namor here, this one's a little more important. So Namor is a champion with powerful utility from his signature ability, high sustainability from his on-special activation regen, and high damage potential from his special 3 Fury effects. When comparing Namor's damage output and sustainability with all champions of the game, he is among the best in both categories. Namor's signature ability provides some of the most potent utility in the game, allowing him to ignore all incoming damage. His damage potential is among the highest, his regen is amongst the highest, currently has one of the shortest average fight times, and when compared to champions like Quake or Ghost, they have a much higher skill threshold, while Namor's Imperious Rex is almost inevitable in a fight. So their objectives is to slow down the rate at which he activates Imperious Rex, lower his regeneration, because the original intention was to allow him to fight back against recoil and suicide masteries, but it's so potent that he's ending up gaining more health than he loses. We will not be touching his Sig ability. This is a key part of what Namor is. In fights where his opponents are bleed immune, Namor should be just as potent as before. So these graphs I've learned are useless. We're going to move on because, again, I think these graphs are crap. Namor ones might actually be relatively reasonable, but I don't think they're necessary to understand the minor amount of changes they did to him. So the only changes to Namor are medium attacks, chance to inflict bleed increased from 30 to 60%. And regeneration on special activate decreased from 6% of missing health to 3% of missing health. So what does this mean? So this is big in the sense that people, like, if you're wondering how does this affect his Imperious Rex, Namor activates Imperious Rex by gaining 30 outrage charges. He gains 1 outrage charge every 3 seconds. Move here. Awesome, I don't have the numbers here. He gains 1 stack every 3 seconds. We move here. So he has a passive 90 seconds to trigger. So you automatically trigger Outrage or Imperious Rex after 90 seconds of literally nothing. And then I was lazy on the math here because the probability tree was massive and I didn't remember how to do it the easy way. So I was lazy and I said, well, on the 30% chance, the current one, it takes an average of 43 hits or a median of 43 hits technically. And on the new multiplier, it's a median of 75 hits, which means it will be 1.744 times as long, only accounting for medium hits. The thing to remember is that this actually is going to be less long, just because the timer, the 3 seconds outrage charge, is going to affect this. Probably going to be closer to like 50% as long to hit a Imperious Rex or the full 30 outrage. And the heal on special change from 4.83% of missing health, because, like, you know, the percentage health change is affected by poison. This is also accounting for max recovery to 2.4, and this is all assuming that you're sitting at 0 health. Just saying. But for the most part, you're only really regenerating when you're throwing your special 3, and you throw a lot of special 3s with Namor. So what this really means is every time you throw a special 3 with Namor, you're only regenerating like 2.4% of your max health instead of 4.8, which is fine, of your missing max health. So, which is fine because, again, you know, you're already mitigating so much damage with his awakened ability as well as suicides. Now, there's something major here I want to talk about that I think kind of goes unseen, and I don't know if it's going to be expected from Kabam. I think this is actually going to be a mitigated effect for Namor. And the thing is that before, you would hit a special 3, and you would save it until you hit 29 outrage charges, and then you would throw your special 3, hit 30, throw another special 3. Because, just because, like, the way the duration timer worked, when you were, like, throwing multiple mediums, you were sitting at, like, 17 or 18 outrage charges when you got to your special 3. Now that it's going to take longer, you can comfortably throw that special 3 right away, ramp up to another special 3, over the course of the fight, throw that second special 3, and then do your rotation from there. And I'm not entirely sure that's how it's going to work, but I'm going to have to play test it to see, because I think that that's what the timing window is going to change. So effectively, it's going to change Namor from this ramp to special 3 stall, big burst window and fight, to ramp to special 3, get a nice solid, like, modest damage boost, ramp to special 3, big burst window, and fight if it's still ending. And personally, I think this is actually going to help him in even chunkier fight pools. Like, before, he was really good for champions who had relative health pools the size of, like, Realm of Legends Winter Soldier, but after Realm of Legends Winter Soldier, you know, slash like maybe a little more tanky like Realm of Legends Hulk, you know, he started to fall off because like you had to build up to a second window. Now you can use that first window, that initial Fury, to get some solid damage out, and then you can use the second window to get even further. Additionally, like, I don't know, I just think this is going to overall help his long-term fights. But we'll have to see and play test personally. I know I personally will not be selling my Namor. I think that most people, if you awakened your Namor, it was for the robust reason, and that robust reason was the fact that his awakened ability completely just hardcore counters any kind of Thorns damage. That said, this was a super long video. Thank you for sticking it out. There will be tons and tons of timestamps. I know I was very opinionated on these, and I apologize for the swears. You know, that's kind of necessary. But for those of you who stuck it out, you know, feel free to disagree, argue with me. Just keep it civil. If you are disrespectful, or I feel like you are inappropriate in any way, shape, or form, I will hide your comments. Don't take it personally. I honestly won't even answer if I feel like you're being disrespectful. I just want to put that disclaimer out here. This takes an insane amount of time to make. Like, you have no idea. I think I'm like 5 hours in of like chewing over these patch notes and like making this video. And so like, please just be courteous. You know, I'm not perfect. And I'm not bashing anyone for their thoughts or opinions, and I want to hear it all, but at the same time, be respectful of mine. And I know I don't feel like I should have to put that disclaimer in here, but over champions, I feel like the conversation might get a little heated, and I give that, you know, totally fair. It can absolutely get heated. People could disagree, and you might think I'm an idiot for my thoughts on Cull Obsidian, or you might think, hey, I'm underestimating this Namor nerf, and it's way worse than I think it is. But these are my thoughts. These are my opinions. That's what you came here for. So if you want to share yours, I want to hear it. Just be respectful, and I'll try to give you the same respect back. That said, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you all later.